The official designation was Research Facility Al-Wadi 7. The team called it Sector 7 from the moment the target package arrived, because the target package included a sector grid reference ending in the number 7, and Sergeant First Class Roy Pittman, who had 14 years in Special Forces and had developed over those 14 years a comprehensive set of opinions about how things worked and what numbers meant, said that this whole tasking had 7 written all over it in the Army's particular handwriting, which was the handwriting of "God help you, son." Pittman was not wrong. He was rarely wrong about these things. The team was ODA 574, 6 men. Captain Avery Hollis, 31, commanding. Tight-wound and meticulous in the way of officers who know that carefulness is the primary survival skill in their profession. Pittman, Senior NCO. Staff Sergeant Luis Carrera, Weapons. Staff Sergeant James Dorr, Communications. Sergeant Tim Okafor, Intelligence. Specialist Paul Webb, Medical. Between them, they had 31 years of Special Forces experience, spoke 7 languages, and had been in more countries they were not officially in than they could accurately count. They were inserted by MH-60 Blackhawk at 0230 local time, February 15, 1991, ground temperature 44 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. No moon. The landing zone was a flat hardpan 11 kilometers from the target, chosen for its distance from potentially active Iraqi radar installations. They walked the 11 kilometers in full kit in 3 hours and 40 minutes, which is disciplined movement across rough terrain in the dark, and arrived at the target's outer perimeter at 0612, having paused twice for route security, and once for Okafor to consult his maps against the GPS unit they'd been issued 3 weeks before, and which Pittman still didn't fully trust. The target was visible before they reached it. Visible not as a structure, not as lights or vehicles or any conventional indicator of a functioning facility, but as an absence, a dark bulk against the slightly less dark of the desert sky, too regular for geology, too low for a military emplacement. No lights, no power signature, no heat signature. Dorr had been running a PAS-7 thermal imager for the last 2 kilometers of approach, and the facility read cold, ambient temperature, the same as the desert floor in every direction. Pittman said this to Hollis as they set up an observation post on a rise 300 meters northeast. He said it quietly, specifically, because he wanted Hollis to hear the precision of the observation. That building reads like it's not there. Thermally, it does not exist. Nothing that's been occupied registers that cold. Nothing that's been recently vacated registers that cold. It's as if something removed every calorie of heat from that structure deliberately over time. Hollis made a note of this in his log. He made a note of everything. He was that kind of officer. They moved to the perimeter at 0631. The perimeter was a low concrete wall, knee height, no wire, no sensors that Carrera could identify. The vehicle gate on the south face was standing open, the chain that had secured it cut or broken and hanging from the left post. No guards, no guard post infrastructure, no sandbags, no fighting position, no spent brass, no food wrappers, none of the irreducible detritus of a manned post. As if there had never been guards here, or as if whatever had been here had not needed them. Hollis ordered a full perimeter check before entry, in pairs, 30-meter spacing. They walked the wall. Carrera and Okafor took the south and west faces, Hollis and Pittman the north, Dorr and Webb the east. What Carrera found in the vehicle park was the first anomaly of substance. His testimony from the 2019 Review Board, which appears in the declassified materials, describes it as follows. The surface inside the vehicle park was fused. The word I keep coming back to is glazed, as if the ground had been heated past the point of coherence and then cooled very rapidly. Not just the top layer. I broke the surface with my boot heel, and the fusing went down at least 4 inches, like the interior of a kiln, like someone had run a sustained and extremely intense heat source very close to the ground for a period of time. He specifies, not an explosion. An explosion disturbs material outward, creates a crater, leaves char and debris. This was smooth, glassy at the surface, fused below. No carbon residue, no fuel smell, no concussion damage to the wall surface nearby, just the ground transformed. The team photographed this. Those photographs are in the original mission report and remain redacted in the 2021 release. They entered through the main gate at 0649. The interior layout was consistent with a research facility of medium scale. Administration in the front third of the building, accessed through a lobby with a security desk, unmanned, no sign of recent occupation. Laboratory space in the central third of the building, accessed through a pair of heavy doors, propped open with a fire extinguisher, suggesting someone had regularly passed through them in some previous period of occupation. Storage and utility functions at the rear. The floors were poured concrete, dusty. The dust was undisturbed everywhere they walked, except in the central corridor, where foot traffic had been regular enough to show a worn path. The dust on that path was disturbed in the pattern of many passages, many feet over time, but not recently. The surface of the worn path itself had acquired a fine new layer of dust, suggesting weeks, perhaps months, of non-use. The labs had been used for serious work. Okafor moved through them with his camera and his Arabic language training and collected everything he could: documents, binders, technical drawings rolled and stacked in wall-mounted holders, individual papers lying on benches as if set down mid-task. He described, in his 2019 testimony, the general nature of the work as instrumentation development, very specifically tuned instrumentation, not weapons, not communications in any conventional sense, something more like they were trying to receive something, or to measure it, or both. He specifies that the documents, on initial assessment, indicated the program had been ongoing for at least a decade, and that the scientific personnel involved had been numerous and experienced. But the equipment was the issue. Doerr's testimony. I have done a lot of facility assessments. I know what Soviet-pattern scientific equipment looks like, because Iraqi programs were running Soviet-pattern equipment from the 50s through the embargo. I know what Western licensed equipment looks like, because some of it made it in before the sanctions. What was in those labs was neither. The components were machined, obviously machined, with tool marks and material finishes that are consistent with human manufacturing. But the configurations, the way the components were assembled, and the apparent purpose of the assemblies did not match any engineering principle I was trained in. I could recognize the idea of a circuit without being able to say what the circuit was intended to do. I could recognize the idea of an antenna array without being able to say what frequencies it was shaped for. It was like reading a language where you know the alphabet, but none of the words. The ventilation system was running.
This was the second anomaly, and it deepened rather than resolved the first. A facility with no power signature, no heat signature, showing no thermal evidence of any active system to aerial and thermal observation, was running its ventilation at full capacity. Air was moving through the building at a measurable rate. Webb held a strip of tissue at a vent and watched it deflect steadily. And the air coming through the vents tasted of metal faintly, as Hollis described it, the taste of the inside of an old coin or of a dental instrument, as if the air had been in close contact with something metallic for a very long time. The low-frequency sound began at 0712, approximately 23 minutes after entry. It was felt before it was heard, a periodic pressure in the chest, a resonance in the teeth and in the sinus cavities, the way very low bass notes register in the body before the ear processes them as sound. Regular, once every 11 seconds, measured by Doerr, who timed it against his watch because timing things was a reflex.
a single pulse at 11-second intervals, unchanged throughout their time in the building, consistent from room to room. Pittman spent 20 minutes working the building trying to locate the source. Every time he thought he had sourced it, it appeared to be equidistant from his new position, the same distance away in the same direction, which was physically impossible unless the source was moving as he moved. He reported this to Hollis, who logged it, and neither man said what both men were thinking, which was that the source appeared to be aware of them. The door at the end of the central corridor was steel, heavy gauge, multi-point deadbolt. It had been locked. It had been opened from the corridor side. The bolt housing was deformed, compressed in a radially even pattern consistent with the application of very great and very evenly distributed force over a sustained period. Not a breach charge, not a cutting tool. Something had pressed against the lock and kept pressing until the metal gave way. The pressure marks on the bolt housing covered the entire surface area of the housing, uniformly. Hollis ordered the door opened. Carrera and Pittman cleared the room beyond. The room was 20 meters square, former storage, metal shelving along the walls in standard modular configurations, the shelving intact. The floor was dusty concrete, showing the wheel marks of palletized equipment moved some time ago. In the center of the room was a single device, a concave dish, perhaps 60 centimeters across, oriented face up on a low tripod, the dish itself composed of a material that Dorr could not identify, metallic in appearance but with a texture under the touch that he described in his testimony as slightly yielding, the way a very firm membrane yields, not the rigidity of metal. The device was warm. It was the only warm object in the entire facility, and it was operating. They could feel it operating, the same 11-second pulse, localized now, the source confirmed as this device, warm under the fingers, face tilted upward toward the concrete ceiling. It had no power source, no cable, no conduit, no battery housing, no evidence of any connection to external power. It was running under whatever it was running under. 7 dead men were in the room, Iraqi officers by their uniforms and rank insignia. Arranged at equal intervals against the walls, seated, backs against the concrete, facing inward toward the device in the center. Positioned, Hollis's word, recorded in the original report and verified in his 2019 testimony, positioned, not fallen. They showed no signs of violence. They showed no signs of illness. Their expressions, as Pittman described them, attentive.
Like they had been listening when they died, and death had not disturbed that attentiveness. Like whatever they were listening to was more important than dying. Okafor spent 34 minutes working the documents in the room. His 2019 testimony about what those documents described was the most heavily redacted portion of the review board transcript. What was not redacted was the following exchange. The board asked, what was the device designed to receive? Okafor said, a transmission. The board asked, from what source? Okafor said, that is one of the questions I have been asked not to address in full. The board pressed him, noting that this review was convened for the purpose of establishing a full record. Okafor said, the documentation makes a distinction between directional orientation in terms of spatial direction and in terms of temporal direction. The device was pointed at the ceiling, but the documentation indicates that the signal source is not above the facility in the spatial sense. The word used can be translated as above or as before, as in earlier, prior. The signal was described as originating from a direction that could be characterized as preceding the present in time. He paused. The documentation quantifies the transmission duration. The number given is not in years. It is in geological units. The working estimate in the documents was that this signal had been transmitting continuously for a period that predates any human civilization on Earth by several orders of magnitude. The board was quiet. Okafor said, whatever they built in that room successfully received that signal.
The 7 men in that room were there when it was first received. The date of first reception is in the documentation. It was 14 months before we arrived. And what answered, he said, had been in the building for some portion of the 14 months since. The documentation in the room shows evidence of updates being made over a period of time, handwritten addenda, dated entries. The most recent dated entry was 3 weeks before our insertion. Something was in that building 3 weeks before we arrived. Something that was described in the documentation, and this is the phrase I will use because this is the phrase the scientists used, as having arrived in response. ODA 574 extracted from the facility at 06:21. It was struck by air-delivered munitions at 10:47. The munitions used are not documented in standard Desert Storm ordnance records. The declassified materials include one photograph from the facility, the single item from the mission's photographic record that was cleared for release. It shows a section of the central corridor, dark and poorly framed, clearly taken in haste. At the extreme right edge of the frame, at the corridor's end, there is a shape. The image quality does not support definitive identification. The shape is large, it is upright, it is oriented toward the camera. The photograph's timestamp indicates it was taken at 04:12. Every member of ODA 574's position at 04:12 places them in the central lab, 2 corridors away. No member of the team entered the main corridor at 04:12. No member of the team took that photograph. The camera that took it was Okafor's. It was in his kit bag, secured during the period in question. The shape at the end of the corridor was there before the team arrived. It is facing toward where they would eventually come. It was waiting. There are several things that the 2021 declassification did not address, and which have been the subject of informal discussion among the small number of researchers who have worked with the materials. The first is the signals intelligence intercept that identified the facility in the first place.
The intercept was made 11 days before the insertion, on February 4, 1991, by a national security agency collection asset operating in the region. The intercept description, which is itself a separately classified document, referenced in the mission materials but not released in 2021, was summarized in the target package as follows. Single encrypted transmission, duration approximately 14 seconds. Origin geolocation consistent with the target coordinates. Signal format unrecognized by any existing SIGINT template. Transmission content currently unresolved. Unresolved, not undeciphered. Unresolved. These are different words. Undeciphered means the key is missing. Unresolved suggests something more fundamental, that the signal does not parse as a signal in any conventional sense, that it does not have the structure of communication as communication is currently understood. The second unaddressed question is the nature of ODA 574's insertion. The team was inserted at 02:30 local time on February 15th, which places them at the target by 0600. Which places their extraction at 0621. From insertion to extraction, 3 hours and 51 minutes. The airstrike was delivered at 10:47, 4 hours and 26 minutes after the team left the building. In the gap between extraction and strike, the facility was unoccupied by any known party. For 4 hours and 26 minutes, the facility and whatever was in it were left alone. No record exists of any monitoring during this period. No aerial observation, no signals collection, no thermal imaging pass. For 4.5 hours, it was unwatched. Whatever the device in the storage room was receiving, whatever signal had been arriving since before the existence of human civilization, had been received at 04:12 on the morning of February 15, 1991, by something that was waiting in the corridor, received it without interruption for 4 more hours. The facility was then destroyed. The 2021 declassification includes a brief final section described as an assessment summary. It runs to 1 paragraph. The paragraph is entirely redacted. Beneath the redaction, someone has written in the margin, in handwriting that does not match any other handwriting in the declassified materials, the following. The device was not destroyed in the strike. Thermals confirm no heat signature from the device material post-strike. The material does not burn. We do not know where it is. The note is undated. The handwriting has not been identified. The material does not burn. We do not know where it is. Remember that, the next time you hear a pulse at the edge of your hearing. Regular, approximately every 11 seconds. Low, below the comfortable range of sound, felt more in the chest than the ears. Remember it and count. Count the seconds between pulses. 11 seconds. If it is 11, then whatever they built in that desert room, whatever warm, indestructible, sourceless device answered a signal older than civilization, it found a new home after the strike. It has been running ever since. It is still receiving. And whatever answered it the first time, in that corridor, at 0412 on the morning of February 15, 1991, has been listening to it ever since. 11 seconds. Count.